A midnight phone call from my son. I never thought it would end with me staring at a photo of him on a Vegas rooftop, spraying champagne and laughing about what he called gullible parents. "Mom, I need $5,000 for emergency surgery." That's what Brandon sobbed into the phone. He sounded absolutely terrified. He said he'd collapsed at work. Said it might be internal bleeding. He was alone in some urgent care, about to be transferred, and his insurance was a mess. I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask for paperwork or even call a hospital. I just opened my banking app and wired the money. $5,000 gone in 5 minutes. By the next night, I was holding my phone again, this time in my bedroom under the dim light of my nightstand lamp. A friend from church had sent me a screenshot. "There's your boy," the message read. And there he was, Brandon on Instagram, champagne in one hand, cigar in the other, in some flashy Vegas suite with purple LED lights and 2 women on his lap. The caption read, "When your mom still thinks you're dying." #Vegas #free #5K #blessed. I felt something break. Not snap, but break. Like a bone weakened for years by small fractures that finally shatters clean through. I just sat perfectly still. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I just stared at that photo until the room went quiet in my head. Then I opened my banking app again. I found that wire transfer and hit request reversal. I attached the screenshot, marked it as fraud. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. Just 24 hours earlier, I was standing in my cozy kitchen, pulling a loaf of banana bread out of the oven, feeling proud because I'd just finished transferring my granddaughter's fall tuition. It smelled like cinnamon and comfort. The house was quiet, peaceful, that kind of stillness you only earn after raising a child, burying a husband, and living long enough to know where all the grief settles. That morning, Brandon had called saying he'd collapsed at work. Said he was dizzy, vomiting, couldn't keep food down. "They think it's internal," he whispered, like he didn't want the nurse to hear. "Mom, I'm scared." My blood ran cold. Not because I doubted it, I didn't, not then. Because I did believe him. I told him I'd wire the money right away. I asked what hospital. He dodged the question, they were still figuring it out. I didn't press. I'd spent 29 years patching that boy together, cleaning his scrapes, calling in favors. I had raised him alone after his father died in a wreck in '97. Brandon had been 7. I was 37, working full-time at the credit union, pulling double shifts just to afford his braces and soccer cleats. I was the tooth fairy and the discipline and the warm dinner and the emergency contact. He always came first, so of course I wired the money. Of course, I made excuses for him like I always had. "He's just overwhelmed," I told my neighbor when Brandon forgot my birthday last year. "He works too hard," I'd said after he pawned my late husband's watch to get it cleaned, then never brought it back. But that night, standing in my little kitchen with banana bread cooling on the counter and my phone in my hand, I didn't feel proud anymore. I felt tired, and I felt duped because for the first time, I realized Brandon hadn't just made a mistake. Years don't pass without teaching you things. And one of the hardest lessons is learning to recognize lies, even when they come wrapped in tears, a kiss on the cheek, and a trembling, "I'm sorry, Mom. I wasn't thinking." Looking back, the signs weren't subtle. I just didn't want to see them. Brandon said he'd borrowed his father's Rolex just to get it cleaned. That watch, the one Frank wore every Sunday for 20 years, was more than a timepiece. It was memory, ritual, legacy. He took it with a grateful smile, said he'd bring it back next week. 3 weeks later, I saw it listed on eBay. I recognized it immediately, the cracked clasp, the nick on the leather strap I'd replaced myself in 2010. When I confronted him, he flinched. "You really think I'd steal from you?" he asked, eyes wide, voice cracking. And yes, I wanted so badly to believe him. So I did. Just like I did the year he canceled Thanksgiving at the last minute. I'd spent the day roasting the turkey, baking pies, setting the table with those little embroidered napkins he used to love as a boy. He called that morning, said work had an emergency. That night I saw him tagged in a photo, grinning in a Miami nightclub, drink in hand, not a care in the world. And still I made excuses. He's under pressure, I told myself. He's just overwhelmed. But this? Pretending to be in the hospital, faking a surgery just to trick me into wiring $5,000, then bragging about it in public? That wasn't forgetfulness. That wasn't stress. That was cruelty. It wasn't just a lie. It was a plan. He calculated that I would panic, that I would pay, that I would never question him. And the awful part is he was right. Until now. When I saw that post, everything in me went still. Not angry, not heartbroken, just clear. He doesn't see me as his mother anymore. He sees me as a source. And I decided right then and there that if he wanted to treat me like a transaction, he'd soon find out what it feels like when the account closes. What he never bothered to ask or remember was what I actually did for a living. I didn't just work at a bank. I spent 35 years managing risk at a regional credit union, specializing in internal fraud and compliance. For a decade, I ran workshops on elder scam prevention. I spoke at conferences. I testified in court. I was the woman people called when their own sons tried to siphon money through fake LLCs or romantic sob stories. I knew the playbook because I helped write the one that put men like Brandon behind legal firewalls they couldn't sweet-talk their way out of. I'd let myself forget that part of me. After I retired, I tucked all those binders and certificates into my study, buried between cookbooks and photo albums. I focused on being a grandmother. I taught Nora how to make pie crust. And I taught myself how to pretend that Brandon's excuses were just temporary storms in his otherwise sunny nature. But the moment I saw that Instagram post, something cold and methodical returned to me. I went to my study, pulled out the gray metal filing cabinet most people mistook for storage. Inside were folders labeled in my own handwriting: Asset Protection, Power of Attorney Prep, Wire Reversal Policy 2018, and Fraud Family Pattern Cases. And under that, my volunteer credentials for the state's Elder Fraud Task Force. What Brandon didn't know, couldn't have imagined, is that I'd spent the last 5 years consulting quietly, helping investigate scams just like the one he tried to pull. I still had contacts, good ones. Miriam from Internal Investigations, Dean from Western Bank Compliance, a retired IRS analyst who owed me more than one favor. Brandon thought he'd found an easy target. He didn't realize I've helped put better liars than him on probation and frozen accounts twice as tangled as his. I wasn't interested in revenge. I wanted a trail, a record, something undeniable. The next morning, I made one phone call. Only one. That's all it took. Miriam, I said, my voice calm. It's Dot. I need a quiet favor. The kind we used to pull off before retirement. Miriam Stokes had been my colleague at the credit union for over 20 years, back when we handled everything from counterfeit checks to employee theft rings. She had the instincts of a bloodhound and a memory like a vault. And more importantly, she still had access to the internal fraud systems through her post-retirement contract work. We met an hour later in her office, a small windowless room behind the local credit union branch. She shut the door before I could even sit. "Is this about your son?" she asked. Her eyes had already narrowed. I nodded once. That was enough. She opened her secure terminal and typed fast. "Let's start with any recent wire activity tied to your name. You said he used the emergency surgery excuse." I handed her my phone. "Here's the text." He made it sound like life or death. I sent it to his checking account. Miriam didn't flinch. She'd seen it all before: sons, granddaughters, caregivers, bleeding accounts dry while the victim smiled and insisted everything was fine. But this time her jaw actually clenched. "Dot," she said slowly. "He didn't just use your name to get money from you." I sat forward. "What do you mean?" She turned the screen so I could see. A flagged entry popped up on her dashboard. A casino line of credit opened 2 months ago with my name listed as guarantor. My breath caught. That's not possible. I never. He used your info, she said flatly. Full legal name, birth date, partial social security. You're backing over $20,000 in revolving gambling credit at 4 different Vegas properties. I felt my spine stiffen. Are you sure it's tied to my name? Miriam didn't blink. Positive. He forged you as a co-signer. Probably scanned your old tax documents or copied the info off your checkbook. You'd be amazed what people hand their kids without thinking twice. I wasn't amazed. I was furious. That evening, I sat on my back porch with a cup of tea, watching the wind move through the trees. It used to be my favorite time of day, the golden hour, Frank called it. The time when the noise dies down and the truth of things settles in. I thought I'd feel broken, hollowed out. But instead, I felt sharper than I had in years. This wasn't grief. It was clarity. Brandon hadn't just betrayed me. He'd constructed an entire ecosystem of lies. And he'd built it on my name. He was gambling with my credit, my history, my peace, and for what? A bottle of champagne, a weekend suite, and the thrill of thinking I'd never know. What he didn't understand, what none of them ever seemed to, was that I don't fall apart when people lie to me. I get organized. I wasn't interested in revenge. I wasn't trying to embarrass him or punish him. What I wanted was documentation. I wanted every transaction traced, every lie recorded. I wanted the banks to flag him. I wanted Western Bank to know what kind of name he dragged into their system. I wanted anyone who came after me, creditor, fraud investigator, attorney, to see my paper trail and know she didn't just sit there. I opened my old file box and pulled out a folder labeled Legal Protections, Contingency Use. Inside were the power of attorney revocation forms, copies of notarized ID verifications, and a checklist I drafted for myself 5 years ago just in case something like this ever happened. Frank used to tease me about it. Nobody's coming for your banana bread empire, he'd say. But I always knew if anyone did come, it'd be someone who thought they were entitled. So I began logging everything. The wire transfer, the Instagram photos, the Venmo screenshots his friends had public. I created a cloud folder, labeled it Brandon Liability, and I called Miriam. I need anything you can find on the casino accounts, scanned docs, IP addresses, timestamps. Quietly. Her answer was immediate. You'll have it tomorrow. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't warn him. But I had made my decision. He was going to learn what it meant to steal from someone who understood the system better than he did. Later that night, I lay in bed with the TV muted, the glow of my phone screen lighting up the dark. I wasn't scrolling for comfort. I was hunting. I went back to that Vegas photo, the one my friend sent, the one Brandon had been tagged in. Champagne bottle in hand, shirt half unbuttoned, 2 women laughing beside him like they'd hit the jackpot. At first glance, it looked like just another post from another careless weekend. But I taught myself to read images like records. Every reflection, every timestamp, every visible logo, a breadcrumb. Behind him in neon blue was the name of the nightclub, Arya Sky Bar. I took a screenshot and zoomed in. There it was, the timestamp. 8:46 p.m. Friday night. That would be the exact time he had claimed he was being prepped for emergency surgery. They said I might not make it through the night. I remembered that wording. I remember freezing in my kitchen, nearly dropping the spatula. So, I checked my messages. He texted me at 8:32 p.m. The lie was already in motion. 14 minutes later, he was on a rooftop with bottle service. The fury didn't come suddenly. It came slow, rising like the tide. I'd cried for him, prayed, sent money without hesitation. While he was laughing in a VIP booth, probably letting his friends toast to my gullibility. I went back to the nightclub's website. It took me 2 minutes to find their booking system. With a little digging, cross-referencing public friend lists and tagged posts, I traced one of the girls Brandon had been with. Her name was Mel, blonde, eyelash extensions, very public Instagram. Mel had posted a table receipt, $4,982. She even wrote #splitting it #skullflying #money in the caption. At the bottom of the bill was a clear breakdown. Brandon paid in full. I took another screenshot, uploaded it to my growing folder. People think older women can't navigate technology, that we're too slow, too trusting, too polite to dig. But I'd built a career watching men try to hide things they thought no one would question. And Brandon, he just left his first fingerprint. The next morning, I went to the public library. Not because I didn't have a computer at home, but because I didn't want any digital trace leading back to my IP address. Old habits die hard. I picked the farthest terminal in the corner, logged in with a guest pass, opened 3 tabs. First, Arya Skybar's VIP booking system. Second, Mel's Instagram. Her account was still public. Third, a reverse phone lookup site I used to train volunteers on back when we taught digital safety to seniors. Brandon had always been careless when it came to women. Charming enough to impress, dumb enough to leave a trail. It didn't take long to find more than I needed. Mel had tagged 4 people in her Vegas posts. 2 of them had their Venmo feeds public. One had a payment from Brandon just 2 days ago. Caption, #Vegas bottle with popping cork. Thanks for covering my share. I screenshotted everything. Names, handles, payment amounts. Then came the real prize, a photo of Mel holding the receipt from the Sky Bar. The same one I'd seen the night before, but now I had the metadata from the image, timestamp, location. The credit card number was partially visible, enough to match the last 4 digits to Brandon's old Western Bank card, the one I used to help him pay off after college. And just like that, I had a direct link between his lie and his lifestyle. I organized the screenshots into folders on a USB stick I kept on my keychain, something Frank and I used to call our digital lockbox. I labeled it Wellness 2023 just in case he ever got nosy. Leaving the library, I felt steady, not angry, not even bitter, just prepared. Brandon thought he was running a little game, a weekend grift. What he didn't know, couldn't possibly imagine, was that he wasn't just disappointing his mother. He was committing wire fraud, gambling under false identity, and impersonating a cosigner on a federal application. The kind of things that come with penalties. By midday, the reversal was complete. The $5,000 Brandon thought he'd pocketed had quietly returned to my account, flagged under unauthorized use of funds. I didn't notify him. I let the transaction speak for itself. At 12:17 p.m., the first message arrived. "Mom, what did you do?" A few minutes later, another. "They pulled the funds. I'm still in the hospital. What are you thinking?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He wasn't texting out of fear for his health. He was panicking about being caught. By 1 o'clock, his tone had shifted. "This is serious. I might not make it through surgery. Why would you do this to me? You're all I have." It's not about money. It's about trust. There it was. The old strategy. Tug at the emotional threads, cast himself as the victim, and hope I unravel first. But I just watched the messages come in from across the kitchen table while I stirred honey into my tea. Not numb, just clear. His words no longer carried weight. They were familiar, manipulative, and carefully timed. I'd fallen for them before, more times than I cared to admit. At 2:43, the guilt turned to cruelty. "You always loved control more than you ever loved me. No wonder Dad drank." I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I believed it, but because it revealed exactly how far he was willing to go when charm failed him. I took a screenshot and filed it in the folder. I wasn't arguing. I was documenting. By late afternoon, the aggression gave way to desperation. "I'm sorry, I messed up. I panicked. Please, can we talk? I'll pay you back. I swear I just need a few weeks." It was all so textbook. The same emotional cycle I'd excused for years, now laid out in a perfect trail of digital fingerprints. By 6 p.m., the phone had gone quiet. Maybe he thought silence would reset the game. Maybe he was regrouping. By the next morning, my dining room table didn't look like a place for breakfast. It looked like a war room. Papers spread from one end to the other. My laptop sat open in the center, legal pad, highlighters, 2 USB drives, a printer still warm from the last run of screenshots. I hadn't slept much, but I didn't need to. Adrenaline sharpens everything. I'd spent the past 12 hours building a timeline. Every lie, every dollar, every breadcrumb. First was the Venmo thread. Brandon had sent his friends money the same weekend he claimed to be in emergency surgery. One transfer had a champagne emoji and the caption, "Vegas baby flying money dancer." Another said, "Mom came through again, tears of joy," followed by 3 clapping hands and a flame. I printed those. Then came the text messages. I exported our full conversation thread from the night of the so-called hospital incident, timestamped with his emotional pleas. "They say I might not make it. Please don't tell anyone, Mom." All while I now knew he was standing under a neon rooftop bar sign ordering bottle service. I paired that with the nightclub receipt, the one his friend Mel had posted. Nearly $5,000 spent with Brandon's name on the payment line. But what changed everything was what I found in the metadata from the image. The time and date weren't just close. They were identical to the moment he claimed he was being prepped for scans. He wasn't in surgery. He was drinking $300 vodka with strangers. Then I printed the exchange where he accused me of loving control more than family. And the part where he claimed, "You're all I have." No shame, no remorse, just leverage. Each printout I hole punched and added to a white binder sectioned with tabs, texts, transactions, social media, fraudulent claims. What I was building wasn't just for me. It was for anyone I might need to speak to, a bank officer, a lawyer, even a judge. There would be no misunderstanding here. Miriam called just after 6 p.m. I was still at the dining table sorting paperwork into labeled folders when I saw her name flash on the screen. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We found something and I need you to brace yourself." I stopped sorting. My hand hovered over a tab labeled credit exposure. "Brandon, Miriam. Just tell me." She sighed. One of those long, tired breaths that let you know it's bad before you even hear the words. "We ran your name through the FAFSA system, part of a standard check when someone uses a cosigner for hardship-based student loan forgiveness." I didn't understand at first. He's not even in school anymore. He was for a semester last year, and he listed you as a dependent. A legal dependent. That's not possible. I know, but it gets worse. Her voice softened. He claimed you were in late-stage cancer treatment and required full-time care. Hospice. He submitted medical records. I went still. My own son had declared me terminal in writing to erase his student debt. Miriam continued gently but firmly. "The forms had your name, your supposed diagnosis, even a falsified doctor's signature. He forged legal documentation to the federal government, and he's collected money off it." I sat back in my chair, staring out the window. But I wasn't seeing the backyard anymore. I was seeing the day I sold my engagement ring to help cover his first year at university. I was remembering the night I stayed up until 3 a.m. editing his scholarship essay because he said he couldn't think straight when he was anxious. I had sacrificed years of sleep, of savings, of self. And now I was someone's made-up hospice patient on a government loan form. It wasn't just fraud. It was identity theft. And it wasn't just about money anymore. Brandon had rewritten who I was on paper, turned me from his mother into a liability, into a lie. Miriam's voice broke through the silence. "We're flagging the FAFSA account. But you're going to want a lawyer." And for the first time in this whole mess, I felt something close to grief. But not for myself. For the son I clearly didn't know at all. That night, I didn't organize anything. I didn't call Miriam back. I didn't even make dinner. Instead, I sat on the living room floor with an old photo album in my lap. The brown leather one with the torn spine. The one Brandon used to flip through as a boy, pointing at pictures of young mommy, like he couldn't believe I was ever anything but old. I turned the pages slowly. There he was in his Halloween astronaut costume, the one I sewed myself because we couldn't afford the store version. There we were at his high school graduation. Me in my best dress. Him with that grin that made everything feel worth it. There was even a picture of him and Frank together, both laughing. Before the accident, before the weight of everything fell on my shoulders alone. And then I came to the photo of my engagement ring. A small diamond, barely half a carat, but Frank had saved for months to buy it. After he died, I kept it locked away. And then one day, Brandon called from his college dorm, panicked. Tuition shortfall, financial aid delay. He'd be dropped from classes if it wasn't covered by Friday. So, I pawned it, walked into a jewelry store in my church dress, and handed it over without blinking. I didn't tell him how hard it was. I just said it's handled and told myself I could get it back one day. But now, sitting there with these photos, I realized something sharp and terrible. Brandon hadn't just taken my money. He'd sold off my identity piece by piece until I wasn't a mother in his eyes anymore. I was a loophole, a source, a signature, a problem to be solved with lies. He hadn't forged documents out of desperation. He'd done it because he knew I'd forgive him or stay quiet or be too ashamed to fight. I waited 2 days before reaching out. Long enough for the silence to make him uncomfortable. Long enough for the panic to start creeping in. And when I finally did text him, I made sure the message was exactly the bait he'd been waiting for. Brandon, I've been thinking. Maybe we should meet. If you still need help with the surgery funds, I'd like to discuss transferring something more permanent, but it has to be at the bank in person. I didn't wait long for a reply. Finally, you see I'm serious, he texted back in all caps like a child who thinks he's won a prize. He followed with a string of dramatic emojis and a guilt-soaked sentence. Thank you for believing in me again. You have no idea what this means. But I did. It meant he thought he still had control, that his tears and sob stories were working, that I was slipping back into my usual role, enabler, forgiver, fallback plan. Except this time I wasn't showing up alone. I forwarded the message to Miriam, then called Dean Marshall, a fraud compliance officer at Western Bank, who owed me a favor from a case we'd worked on years ago. I didn't give him the whole story, just enough. Forged cosigner documents, possible wire fraud, identity abuse across multiple institutions. He didn't hesitate. I'll reserve the upstairs boardroom, he said. Bring your documentation. We'll be ready. I kept the tone light in my next message to Brandon. Thursday, 3 p.m. Western Bank branch on Pine Street. Let's get this settled. He responded instantly. I'll be there. I'll bring the paperwork. I've got nothing to hide. That was almost funny. He'd spent the past year hiding behind paperwork, using it to erase me, manipulate systems, secure credit he never earned, and now he was walking straight into a room filled with everything he thought I'd never find. I printed the last few screenshots, tucked them into the binder, and for the first time in weeks, I slept through the night because I wasn't chasing him anymore. I was waiting. The boardroom at Western Bank was smaller than I remembered. Beige walls, heavy wood table, too cold from the overworked AC. I arrived 10 minutes early, binder in hand, wearing the gray blazer I hadn't put on since Frank's memorial. It still fit. Dean greeted me with a firm nod, no smile. Miriam was already inside, reviewing the folder I dropped off the night before. She didn't say much, just tapped the stack of documents once and said, "He won't walk out of here the same way he came in." At 2:58, the door opened. Brandon walked in like he'd been invited to accept an award. Baseball cap, designer sweats, sunglasses still on. He grinned when he saw me. "Hey, Ma," he said, voice syrupy. Glad you came around. Then his eyes landed on Miriam and Dean. His smile faltered just for a second. What's going on? I didn't stand. I didn't even flinch. Let's go over your recent medical documents, I said calmly, sliding the binder across the table. He blinked. Medical? Mom? What? From the night you were supposedly in surgery. While also appearing in full color on Instagram at a rooftop bar. Dean leaned forward. Mr. Collins, we'd like to clarify a few things before we move forward with any financial transactions. Brandon glanced around the room. Wait, are you serious? I thought we were here to discuss. I'm here, I interrupted, because you used my identity to secure gambling credit lines, lied about my health status to the federal government, and forged my signature on documents I never saw. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I reached into my folder and pulled out a photo. Him holding the champagne bottle, nightclub logo in the background. Recognize this? This was taken 20 minutes after you told me you might die. I let it sit there. No theatrics, no raised voice, just truth printed in full color under fluorescent lights he couldn't dim. Brandon sat back in the chair, shoulders dropping. He wasn't smiling anymore. Brandon shifted in his chair, arms crossed, jaw tight, but he wasn't talking. Not yet, so I did. I opened the binder to the first tab, slid out the screenshot of his Venmo payment to his friend, dated the night of the supposed surgery. Vegas baby flying money dancer, I read aloud. This went out at 9:13 p.m., just after you told me you were in a hospital bed. He shrugged. It was a joke. You're taking this out of context. I didn't respond. I just turned the page. Next, the receipt from Arya Skybar. His name printed clearly on the payment line. $4,982, timestamped to the same hour he texted me about bleeding internally. Then the Instagram photos tagged by his friends. Him, bottle in one hand, cigar in the other. No bandages, no sign of pain, just a man celebrating with someone else's money. Miriam spoke for the first time. Mr. Collins, we also reviewed the casino accounts. You opened 4 revolving credit lines using your mother's name as guarantor. Her information was used without verified consent. That's fraud. He turned to me, eyes wide now. Mom, wait. I didn't think, no, I cut in, voice steady. You didn't care. I flipped to the final tab. Miriam took over. And then there's the matter of the FAFSA documents. You listed your mother as a dependent in late-stage cancer, requiring full-time hospice care. You submitted forged medical records. Brandon paled. Dean added, this wasn't just a family misunderstanding. These were federal forms. Her signature appears here, but it doesn't match her actual signature on any other document in our database. That alone is grounds for investigation. Brandon's hand shot forward. Okay. Look, I didn't mean to. It was just supposed to get me through the semester. I thought it would get wiped clean. No one would check. His voice cracked then, the first real break in his bravado. You weren't supposed to find out, he muttered. I leaned forward, finally looking him in the eye. And that's exactly why I did. He wasn't just careless. He was confident, entitled, certain I'd never looked too closely. But I had, and now everyone else was looking, too. For a few long seconds, no one spoke. Brandon sat slouched in the chair, one hand over his mouth, the other tapping nervously on the table. Gone was the swagger, the smirk, the practiced tone of fake concern. In its place, a flicker of something unfamiliar on his face. Fear. Dean closed the binder slowly and looked at him with the calm certainty of a man who had done this more times than he could count. Mr. Collins, he said, folding his hands on the table. Based on the documentation presented today, we are initiating a full review of all your accounts held with Western Bank. Brandon opened his mouth, but Dean didn't pause. Effective immediately, your personal and business accounts are being frozen pending the outcome of our internal fraud investigation. Any attempts to transfer or withdraw funds will be flagged and blocked. In addition, your access to online banking has been temporarily revoked. Brandon's head snapped up. What? No, that's my rent account. My car. You can't just, I can, Dean said flatly. And I am. He turned to me then. Mrs. Collins, I'd advise you to consult with a lawyer. Given the forged documentation submitted under your name, you may also be entitled to restitution, and your cooperation may be necessary if this proceeds to federal review. I nodded once. My hands were still, my heart was calm. Brandon looked between the three of us like a man watching a structure collapse, one he didn't realize had been built entirely on sand. This is insane, he snapped. It's not like I hurt anyone. You hurt me, I said quietly. You sold me off piece by piece to fund your lifestyle and hoped I'd stay quiet. Miriam stood, collecting her folder. You didn't just lie to your mother. You defrauded institutions, submitted false medical claims, and impersonated a legal signer on federal forms. That's not family drama, Brandon. That's a felony. His jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. For the first time, he understood. I wasn't the one on trial anymore. Brandon didn't wait for the meeting to end. The moment Dean mentioned federal charges, he shoved his chair back so hard it screeched across the tile. This is ridiculous, he snapped, loud enough to echo. He grabbed his sunglasses off the table and stormed toward the door, muttering under his breath until he turned back. You really think any of this changes anything? He said to me, voice tight with rage. You think a little show at a bank makes you some kind of hero? I didn't answer. Neither did Miriam. We just watched him unravel. You ruined my life, he spat. And you're going to feel real smart when I'm homeless because of your little revenge tour. It was strange, almost surreal, the way he still tried to spin himself as the victim. Even here, surrounded by evidence of everything he'd done. He flung open the boardroom door and marched through the lobby like a man wronged, loud, furious, unchecked. He didn't notice the woman in the corner near the ATM, who pulled out her phone when he started shouting. Didn't notice the security guard who took a step forward. Didn't care that he was yelling in a public bank with his full name and face now tied to frozen accounts and pending fraud investigations. By the time I stepped outside 10 minutes later, the clip was already making rounds. My neighbor Karen forwarded it to me. Is this your son? This is going around the neighborhood Facebook group. In the video, he's shouting, I hope you're happy, Mom. I'm your son. What kind of mother does this? It was grainy, shaky, but it didn't matter because it captured what words never could. Brandon exposed. Not charming, not clever, just loud, desperate, and undeniably guilty. Within an hour, someone had added a caption, entitled Son tries to scam his own mom, loses it at the bank. And that's how the image he'd spent years carefully curating, the successful young entrepreneur, the devoted son, began to collapse. 2 days later, I sat across from my lawyer with a fresh binder in my lap and no hesitation left in my voice. Remove him, I said, from everything. We went line by line. Estate, accounts, emergency contacts, power of attorney. Brandon's name was stripped clean like rot from a floorboard. I signed the new will with a steady hand. My lawyer didn't ask questions. He'd known Frank, had helped us draft the original will after the accident. He looked at me now, not with pity, but with respect. I'm filing the restraining order paperwork today, he said. You'll want to keep copies in your purse and glove box. I nodded. Already printed extras. By the end of that afternoon, Brandon was no longer my financial beneficiary, no longer able to touch my records, no longer allowed to contact me for anything related to money, property, or estate. Miriam followed through on her end. Western Bank filed a formal fraud report and closed his credit lines. FAFSA opened a case review for student loan abuse and identity falsification. There was no dramatic call from Brandon, no apology, just silence. And honestly, that was the kindest thing he'd given me in years. I spent that evening moving my accounts to a new credit union. I changed every password, set up multi-factor authentication, and added Nora, my granddaughter, as my emergency contact instead. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just felt clean. For the first time in years, my name belonged to me.